tool to be able to read these research papers, but not just brute force my way through it. I want to be able to kind of interact with the paper. I want to be able to ask it, like, hey, what does this mean? So this demo is a very, very simple idea, but it's called Professor Dumbot, or Dumbot if you're French, if you want to be more polite. But it's a Dumbot who we have prompted and said, hey, you are a world-class machine learning expert who is teaching someone who is a layman. And this person is trying to read a research paper, and they want you to explain various parts about this. So you can come in here and import an Arxiv paper. Arxiv is from Cornell. Most of the papers that end up on Twitter that are not peer-reviewed go through here first. So we all get to read them and enjoy them. But in this one, this is a very, very interesting paper called Mario GPT, where they use a GPT model to actually generate original Super Mario Brothers levels through natural language. So what I'm going to do is just say, hey, I like this paper. Well, I think I like this paper. I'm interested in this paper. And what I want to do is actually go through it. So I'm going to import it here. And it loads up a PDF version of this, somewhat slowly, perhaps. But once it loads up, I'm going to be able to kind of read through it and see how this works. So, yeah, this is like, at this point, basically a slower, worse version of preview on OS X. But at any points, you can kind of come through and see like procedurally generated content. It's not like a terribly complicated thing, but I might wonder like, let's come through. Maybe say I can highlight any parts of this. Say so leveraging neural network architectures to create levels, and I can ask something about this like, this seems interesting. Would you mind expanding? And so this is going to open up a little chat here with Professor Dumbot. And I can prompt him and say, hey, like, what is this about?
Can you make it bigger?
Oh, sure. The chat window is going to get very small. But the idea is like, whenever we first imported that paper, we actually extracted a lot of metadata from it. The title, the authors, the abstract, and whatnot. And we use that to generate a prompt for this paper. And so as I'm going through here, I can highlight anything and kind of ask it like, what is this? Can you please define this for me? And I can ask questions that are kind of embarrassing that I might not normally ask a friend of mine. As we've seen, the people who have presented earlier today, they're all quite impressive. So one I liked in particular is this multitasking models. So it turns out in humans, if you are bilingual, there is a strong correlation that you might be more resistant to neurological damage or dementia in older age. And there's a question of like, why? And so this group of researchers, they actually trained a GPT model that was monolingual and one that was bilingual on a task. And initially it did, the bilingual one does worse. But then what they do is they start to perturb, like they randomly delete individual neurons, they change the weights, and when they see that the bilingual model is actually able to robustly withstand these different changes. So I thought this was a deeply interesting paper, like some kind of philosophical understanding in here. But when they're going through, they start to talk about like the different tasks that they put on, like MNIST and CISFAR and newsgroup. And I'm like, I mean, those all sound very cool. I don't know what those are. So I can literally be like, what are these? I'm going to prompt Dumbot here. And it tells me that, these are all common benchmarks used. MNIST is a data set of handwritten digits. CIFAR is a data set of 10 different. So basically, I can start asking him, just say like, why would we run a task on handwritten digits? And it'll continue the conversation. And I can kind of interact with this paper and say like, why, like what is this? Why is this important? Please define this and give me some context. And the way that this is structured is like, anyone can come in here and start their conversations about this paper. It's all public, there's no secrets here. As embarrassing as the questions might be, they often end up being very useful. So if I felt embarrassed to ask a question about this, it turns out maybe else I'm hacking on, or hacking with feels embarrassing. And so I can see their conversations, I can jump in, and I can have the conversation, I can continue the conversation along there. So we can all kind of share and learn from one another. And then this becomes kind of public. Anyone can come and see these conversations, and these articles become much more approachable to anyone who's learning about them. So that's the current state of things. I'll show you the thing I'm working on that I was trying to give a demo of that I couldn't quite get there, but I think maybe it's good for the purposes of this, which is the prompt that we generate is still kind of generic, right? Like if, the thing is, GPT models are prone to hallucination. And so it'll very confidently tell you what a thing is. And as someone who might not be aware, you'd be like, oh, that sounds very plausible. And so ideally what we do is kind of constrain the model to both tell us when it's not confident about a thing, but also to be able to reference throughout the paper. The thing is, if you try to extract the text from a PDF like this one is not so bad. But if we look at, yeah, this one. This is a beautiful paper. You can see here, we have a paragraph here. The text flows down. You're not reading left to right necessarily. You're kind of in this two-column mode, but you should know that you should ignore this. And it turns out this is a Turing-complete PDF. It is generated from LaTeX. This is like, I suspect that GPT-4, the multimodal, whatever, we just throw in a picture of this and it'll extract it and it'll be wonderful. Currently, this is a nightmare to actually extract. And even if you could, you can't send all of the paper over to the bot to be able to extract context. And so what I do is I parse the LaTeX files, I generate some HTML and Markdown, eventually extract most of the text. I send that over in chunks to the GPT model and say, please summarize this for me. And whenever we start a conversation, I say, hey, the user is about to ask you about this. Here's the context. Here's the summary that you gave me earlier of all these different parts of the paper. If you think something might be interesting in there, let me know, and I'll go and grab it for you, and I'll expand it. And we have this kind of iterative, recursive approach, where we expand, and it can ask for more information that it saw earlier until it gets the answer that it has, or it says, hey, I don't think the answer is in here, and I don't know. And the fun thing about this is, you can actually develop this in a very, so I come from kind of a weird language background, from like Lisps and Clojure, where you have like REPL-driven development. More recently, much more in ML, where you don't have that as much. However, the cool thing is, well, I was definitely expecting to see my previous chats with GPT. However, if you imagine, the way that you did this previously, or sorry, the way that you can do this, what I was going to show you, is that you can kind of say, look, here is the title of the paper. So I'm going to just paste this in. And like I can manually do this. I can go in here and say, here's a little bit of the paper, summarize it for me. Here's another part, summarize it for me. And I give it little IDs. And then I say, here's the title of the paper, here's the question. Which of these paragraphs that you summarized previously do you think might have the answer here? And if it does a good job, then I'm happy. And if it does a bad job, I know I need to work on my prompt. I need to work on my summarization. And so I kind of like, before I write any code, I literally have this kind of interactive dialogue with ChatGPT to figure out like, what are you good at, what are you bad at, like what do I need to actually, how do I couch this in a language that you're going to be able to give me the information to be able to program this. Like later on, I want to like depend on you in a programmatic way. So that's the next feature that I was working on. It actually works very well in a conversational sense. However, extracting the LaTeX from the papers is a very challenging problem. It's not actually an AI problem, it's much more of a researchers are allowed way too much freedom whenever they write their papers problem. So that's the idea right now. And so like, come in here. Oh, and the other idea is that
John, I think you're running up on time. So.
Okay, so the last idea is that what I think would be very fun as a future application, not just for research paper, but for like websites and blogs, is any like article that you read, if you could interact with it, you can ask questions about it, right? So in the same way, and it could be explained, and you can say, hey, that was a great answer, I understand that. But then if you if there was another system that took those conversations, fed it to another agent, and then rewrote the original article for someone of my skill level, who recognized my skill level, and said, look, based off of your skill level, I'm going to rewrite the original article so that those questions that you would have had, based off of other people, other conversations, is now answered prima facie inside of the article itself. So kind of self-updating articles that respond to users who are reading them. So that's the idea.